Hey friends, it's Jake. Welcome to episode 3. Today we got to speak to the incredible Alex Woodward, who got picked up in the AFL draft in 2011 by Hawthorn, where he had the world at his feet. And safe to say, Alex has become one of the most resilient and determined people I think you'll ever come across for what he endured throughout his AFL career. Alex was forced into retirement at the age of 27 due to 5 ACL injuries. And it's a pretty amazing story around how he still looks at life with a glass half full and how he's still moving forward in a positive mindset. Hope you enjoy. Alex Woodward, thanks for jumping on, mate. Really appreciate it.
That's all right.
It's great to have you on the Unlaced podcast. It's quite funny actually, because when I started this podcast, a few people had reached out to me and said, "Mate, you've got to get Alex Woodward on."
It's definitely. I'm definitely flattered that people think of me in that sort of light. So, mate, the pleasure is all mine.
Yeah.
Really looking forward to it, and thanks for having me as a guest.
Nah, good, mate. It's funny. I didn't expect to have you on so early in the podcast. We're on our 3rd episode, which is pretty exciting, but. I was a witness, I guess, a few weeks ago, like most, watching you on open mic on Fox Footy, where you're very candid and transparent about the journey you went through, and actually thought you handled that really well. You spoke really well. I know Mike probably was throwing a few curveballs and trying to get a bit of emotion out of you, but you held yourself pretty well.
Yeah, I think the best way to handle those sort of scenarios, especially question and answer type situations, it's fairly unscripted. So anything that sort of comes to mind, the more natural that it comes across. So yeah, a couple of curveballs, but I was more than ready for it, I suppose. And
Yeah.
I'm very much an open book with my journey. So look, that opportunity on open mic, and it was quite a resounding sort of response with so many people watching and all the nice words and messages. I was really overwhelmed by that, and really appreciative as well. But I was really glad that a lot of people got something out of it. So
Yeah,
similar to this, mate. Like, it was just a chat, and you had a few questions for me. But like I said earlier, I'm pretty open with everything.
no, that's. I thought you spoke really well, mate. So, I think to give a bit of context as to why I guess we pumped you up as an ideal guest for the show, and people that have tuned into the first episodes are well aware that the Unlaced podcast is really more about broadening perspective on the athletes who are in and out of the game, and not just focusing generally just on the sporting performance, but the rigors that come with being a professional athlete, and also life after it, and some of the opportunities and challenges that come with it. And I guess your story, your sporting journey is extremely unique, and I'll probably cut straight to the chase of going into a little bit around it to give some context to the viewers who may be unaware of Alex Woodward and the story at hand. But you had a pretty impressive footy journey as a junior player, and you got picked up in the 2011 draft at pick 53 to Hawthorn. And I've been reading a couple of your blogs, and I noticed that actually when it got to pick 50, you mentioned you had enough of watching it, and you went back to your bedroom, and your dad came in with a beer saying, "Mate, don't get down too early. You've just been drafted." So
That's spot on, mate. That moment was hilarious for me, because I suppose I was never touted as a fairly high draft pick. I wasn't invited to any of the academies or anything like that. I always had to sort of work hard for my spots in the teams that I did make. Not that any of the other players didn't as well. But it was, I suppose on the night, I didn't really have an idea where I would go in the draft or if I would get drafted at all. So I sort of gave myself mentally, all right, pick 50 is the limit. If not, I don't reckon it's
yeah. Well, you got there 3 picks later, but what people, just to give some awareness of, is that obviously at that point, you've had your dream come true, and you've gone to one of the greatest football teams in the modern era. And 10 years later, at the age of 27, you've retired from footy due to experiencing 5 ACL injuries, which is, unheard of in some regards, and probably to the average athlete and human, it would probably, fair to say, it would break them in their own right. But I think having spoken to you and knowing people around you, it's fair to say it's probably made you a pretty strong person. And I just wanted to set that context for some people who maybe aren't aware of the journey of Alex. But Really keen to go back to, I guess, the start of when you got drafted to Hawthorn, and what that feeling was like getting drafted into what was a pretty awesome team at the time, and obviously having your AFL dream come true.
Yeah. So obviously we touched on that night, which was, fantastic in a way that it was almost like a bit of a roller coaster that night, in a sense, from disappointment to elation fairly quickly. So I suppose I'm the definition of almost a local draft pick, really. I went to school at Mazenod. Waverley Park was where the Hawks played. So it was all, and I lived in Noble Park. So it was all within a 5K radius of each other, really. So, yeah, I suppose when you get drafted, the first thing you sort of want to do is make a fairly good impression early. Want to make sure that you listen, be willing to take in information and ask a lot of questions as well. That's how I approached my first pre-season when I was there. Worked really hard. I obviously had a lot of deficiencies and areas that I needed to improve on in order to get considered for a game. But I identified that, look, again, pick 53. Once you're in the system, it doesn't matter what number you are. Everyone's sort of on a level playing field. So I knew that my strengths were, I had a fairly good work ethic. I thought I had a pretty good mindset walking into the football club. But yeah, so I was lucky enough that first season to be considered for what was back then a NAB Cup game. So
that's the pre-season, right?
Yeah. So I was considered for the first couple of games, which is fairly huge for Hawthorn back then, because they weren't really in a position of blooding young players. As you touched on, they were sort of in an
stacked.
Era themselves. Yeah, they were stacked from the midfield to the back line to the forward line. So good luck trying to break into that team, especially when they were healthy.
Yeah.
But look, that was amazing feeling, even though those games didn't necessarily count career-wise. To me, they still meant quite a bit, and there were opportunities to really prove myself on a platform leading into the AFL season. So, look, unfortunately, 5 minutes into one of those games, I did my first ACL in a tackle. What many people don't realise is that I actually tore ligaments in the same tore ligaments in my left ankle, in the same tackle. So, yes, I did my right ACL, but at the same time, did ligaments in my left ankle. So it was sort of offsetting the pain in my right knee. I was more feeling the left ankle. So when I came off, after playing a couple more minutes, not being quite right, I told the physios that, look, my left ankle's cooked. I need to get it strapped up again. Something's going on. I can't.
So you didn't mention your knee, really?
I mentioned it right at the end. It was like, by the way, my knee feels a bit funny as well. So they almost ignored the ankle and then just went straight to the knee. I suppose in terms of body parts, I suppose the knee is a lot more important when you say or mention something that's injured. So they did a couple of tests and shook their head and said, look, your day's done. We probably need scans on Monday because we can't confirm it on the day. They just couldn't quite tell if it was a confirmed ACL tear. So yeah, that plane ride back home, because we were playing in Tasmania that day, it was pretty upsetting because I felt like it was an opportunity missed. And then I was sort of left in the dark a little bit until Monday come scans, and then everything got confirmed, and then everything sort of happened fairly quickly after that with surgery and everything. So that was ACL number one. But also, my first season as a whole at the Hawks was a little bit disappointing, but I still felt, post-surgery, look, there's opportunity there to be a student of the game, even though I couldn't really perform on field. I still wanted to ask questions, still wanted to, evolve as a player, even though I couldn't necessarily kick the footy. So it'd be pretty ignorant of me not to use the wealth of knowledge around me with the likes of Sam Mitchell, Luke Hodge, Brad Sewell, Jordan Lewis. The names go on and on. Sean Burgoyne.
And that Hawthorn team, just for context, you won 4 flags in 10 years in that period, and you were right in the thick of it when you got drafted. So it was pretty elite environment. Yeah,
it was amazing. And then so I suppose my career span there was roughly five years, and they made 4 grand finals. So that in itself was, just to be in that presence was pretty surreal.
Yeah.
But I still think that first season wasn't necessarily a write-off, even though I was 18, 19, and didn't play a game necessarily. So I still felt like that season was really important for me. But unfortunately, my second ACL came 10 months later. So
I was just about to say, because after your first one, you had really many significant injuries before that going in? Because I know you played Danny Dragons and Vic Metro, and you had a pretty clean run into the AFL, didn't you?
Yeah, it's nothing untoward. Like when I was 16, I had a little tiny clean out, which put me out for a couple of weeks. But in terms of continuity and being pretty durable with my footy, that was something that was something I was pretty proud of. But yeah, so all these long-term injuries was fairly foreign to me. Being told that you're out for the season, it's a bit of shock and awe, really. A whole season goes by, you can't really kick a footy out on the field with your teammates. And as I got older and as each ACL went by, it was like, well, this is my job. And I'm not necessarily doing my job to the best of my ability. So those sort of thoughts started to sink in. But thankfully, look, I still had moments where I still got the best out of myself, even though a lot of it was off field. On field, I still think I performed as well.
That's actually one of the things that impresses me the most about you is every athlete and person around sport will know that what makes the athlete happy is playing or competing. So when you can't, you're at a bit of a shell of yourself because you're not doing what you love every day, and you're being restricted, and especially when you're injured, you're in a bit of a lonely space. But something you kind of epitomise, and I know you've spoken about before, is how even though it was your first year and you're pretty down and out and, from your injury and were limited with playing, you mentioned you didn't want to be the negative guy in the room or bring the atmosphere of a great environment down. You were still like, well, I can still be positive. I can still get something out of this, which is a pretty unique perspective and way to look at it when you're an 18, 19-year-old kid. Because I know when I was playing and I had bad injuries, it definitely wasn't that. It was more like, oh, I'm the victim. Whereas you took it the other way. And can you give some perspective into, I guess, what that view was like?
I suppose it's, and the way that you saw your injury is not necessarily a foreign thing either. I think the way that I approached it's more the outlier. And that speaks a little bit to my personality at the time, but a lot of it was optimism. So I don't know, I felt like the way I distracted my negativity was, through being overly positive. Was it a mask at the time? Yeah, maybe. Because as I got older, I learnt to deal with the negative side a bit better. Whereas being overly positive was good, but also led to me being, fairly drained at times as well. You can only be upbeat for so long and not accept the fact that, you're out for 12 months and you really want to be out there and have an opportunity to play AFL footy. When I was 18, I was like, look, if I tick this box, I'm one step closer. Maybe they'll consider to play me this year or something, It was sort of that being naive.
Still positive, right?
Yeah, still positive. And look, it really resounded me with the way I attacked my rehab. I was really positive with my rehab, made sure that I did everything really diligently. But yeah, I never planned to, break down again 10 months later. But surprisingly, that positivity with that second recase still shone through. So I was, okay, I know what I did wrong. I'm going to do this again, but I'm going to do it better, which is really, at the time, it was a little bit different. And I had a few players talk to me at the time saying, look, you need to sort of accept the fact that, look, it's okay to feel down and all that sort of stuff. And I was, at the time, I was saying, yeah, don't worry, I'm feeling pretty good. But now that I look back on it, I was...
Were you masking it a little bit?
Yeah, I was pushing it aside a little bit. But that's, 18, 19, again, still naive, wanting to get back out on the footy field. But I was still really adamant that I could have some sort of a career here. And you were touching on, look, if I'm positive, if I'm doing things off field, I could still get noticed by the coaches and players as a person of the footy club that they want to have around, so to speak. So when you get drafted, you get a 2-year contract. That's what it was back then. So my 2 years essentially were a write-off playing wise.
Yeah,
But so I earned another contract through, the way I attacked my rehab, my persona around the footy club, and that's a pretty unique way to earn another sort of contract in a footy environment.
Can you explain to us, I guess, obviously the first year, my perspective on this is you've had a bit of a heartbreaking moment in the first game, but the optimism really around your AFL career is still well and truly there because it's year one. You got another year in your contract. You're in a great environment. And you kind of stated in your first year, you were really just absorbing as much information and intelligence from the superstars in the change room. And you're probably around the footy club a lot that first year. But can you explain, I guess, as you were building up and you overcame some of the key hurdles to get back into pre-season number 2, and then ACL number 2, what that whole journey and experience was like for you?
Yeah, for sure, mate. It was fairly interesting. It was a bit of a whirlwind at the time, and I felt like the way I distracted myself and accepted the fact that year one was going to be a write-off. I had a lot of players, coaches, and staff, and even fans thought, look, a year in the gym wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. That's the sort of response that you'd get.
Yeah,
wasn't the response that I wanted. I'd rather be playing football and that sort of stuff. But that, again, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. You see mature age players get drafted now at 25 and have, substantial careers. So I wasn't necessarily too stressed at that age about my longevity in the AFL system or my career as a whole. It was more the fact that, that's a bit disappointing. I won't be able to play this year, which is, again, pretty, I suppose, broad in a way that I accepted it. But throughout that first season, I always carried a notebook around. I was very much, like I touched on before, student of the game. Each game I had a specific player that I wanted to watch and write down his attributes, positives, negatives, RFIs, what I wanted to get out of that game and sort of aspects that I'd really admired about that certain player. And that was really interesting because that was, the first time I sort of watched a footy game in that sort of perspective. You know what I mean? When you're a kid and even a teenager, you watch a game, you just watch the contest and it's like, wow, this is, crash and bash and it's really exciting. Whereas if you really focus and narrow your perspective and view on the game for certain things, it just makes viewing football a whole lot different. So that first year I did that. Second year I did that as well. But my second year after, obviously breaking down again after 10 months, I sort of made sure that I had some time off as well. Whereas throughout that first ACL, it was basically a 10-month slog.
Yeah.
And that probably wasn't really that healthy for me. Even, basically went from pre-season rehab for 10 months straight into another pre-season. No real time
non-stop, right?
Other than a couple of weeks where I went overseas or something, but I was still thinking about, I want to play footy.
It's that that kind of mental block, isn't it? That refresh that you get mentally. Yeah.
And it was like a carrot for me or a finish line, so to speak. I was so close to playing again, and when I broke down, it was actually when I broke down in that for my second ACL. It was actually in a practice match, so I was basically back to full training and everything like that. So that was pretty disappointing. I think there's a few photos of me actually crying and stuff because on that day there just happened to be, I think, Channel 9 or so, a few reporters there. So it was just a bit of bad timing, but I knew straight away as well when I collapsed, and it was a really good learning moment for me. In a specific way, in the fact that I thought I was the same player that I was when I got drafted, whereas I wasn't necessarily thinking about, hang on, my right knee's gone through an ACL reconstruction. I should be a little bit more cautious 10 months post surgery.
Right.
And again, me as a young teenager being
a young bull.
Yeah, just naive again. I was so eager to get back in there, and this is the first time I can really, let loose. I'm not that same sort of player, even though I was pretty close to it.
there's got to be an element though of like, and I know you've been through a few, and I know what you're talking about because you probably, I think you mentioned this with the second one. You did a maneuver that you probably wouldn't normally do, and I reckon you were a bit harsh on yourself in saying you're a bit naive because I reckon blokes do stuff like that and they come off scot free. It just happened for you. Maybe you didn't, but I could have done that and been fine, and you could have do it again and you could be fine.
Yeah,
It's really
exactly right. And I've as time went on, I've learnt that some long term injuries and in this certain case ACLs, wrong player, wrong time, wrong scenario. You know what I mean? It's just a bit of bad luck, and I know it's not the answer to everything, but if I overthought it and really blame myself too much, I'll probably be in a pretty bad headspace and probably be a different person to what I am now. So even though I was 19, I was pretty accepting of the fact that, look, that was that scenario, push that aside and we go again.
Yeah, because just with the, I wanted to make a comment before I speak on the, I guess, post-second ACL was you speak, it's actually incredible for me how your perspective when you were injured in year one was to get a notebook and focus on a player of the opposition every day. I reckon that's just awesome. I don't reckon people do that enough in other codes when they're injured to go for a like-for-like player or for someone that they want to be like and go how good or where are their flaws and pick them apart. I think that level of detail, I actually find that really impressive, mate.
Well, I think we see there's that Gold Coast player, Matt Rowell, who came around to the notebook, which I was like, hey, I actually, not that anyone captured it, but the coaches and players knew that I did that. But yeah, I felt like it was really beneficial to me. It was just a different way of viewing the game. And sometimes I took opposition analysis meetings. I thought that was, again, another little avenue of developing my game, even though it was off field. I only took a couple of meetings, spoke about some certain players that I watched, the week before. Got a little bit more, insight into how the club holistically works in the build up to a game on the weekend. You know what I mean? So I developed some really good relationships with coaches and staff as well, support staff. And again, that sort of extends into, my reputation at the footy club as a whole, not just the players, the coaches had a pretty good idea of what type of person I was and so did the support staff. So if end of the day, after my 2-year contract, after getting first drafted, if that was going to be the little, the little thing that sort of gets me over the line for another contract, it does do wonders. Yeah.
So just the moment after you did your second ACL, obviously it's heartbreaking. You mentioned you're in tears, and I've read something, and I just wanted clarification on whether this was true. But I read something that when you went back in the change room, you were that gutted, and obviously you were trying to build yourself up to tell your old man what had happened, and that must have been a pretty hard phone call to have. But then on top of that, I think your old man obviously didn't take it too well either because he was a bit gutted as well. And then I think Luke Hodge, who may have been the captain of the time or one of the big leaders of the club, came in to check on you and offered to speak to your dad on your behalf, which must have been a pretty unique moment in itself. So can you give us some perspective on understanding what happened there?
That's 100% true. Luke probably won't remember that, but that it's definitely a moment that sticks with me. Obviously, after getting injured on field, I got helped off by the trainers. With ACL injuries, I'm not sure if the listeners know, but a lot of the time it's just instant pain. And then after, a good 30 to 60 seconds, you can sort of hobble off, but your knee slowly starts to, swell up and get restricted. So I was helped off the field by some trainers, went straight to the doctor's room, put some ice on my knee. Look, it was fairly certain that it was another ACL tear, the way it felt, the mechanism, and even the test that they did straight away. So I was putting ice on my knee and grabbed my phone, and look, I went to call Dad straight away because he was a bit worried on the actual day, knowing that there was a scratch match on. He just told me to take it a little bit easy. So as soon as I called him, he sort of knew something was a bit different. 10:30 phone call on a training day, and I couldn't really get the words together. So I was sort of crying already on the phone, and then Dad was like, "Oh no, what's happened?" Thankfully, Luke Luke walked in, and I said, "Mate, can you just talk to my dad? I can't really talk to him at the minute because he's pretty upset on the phone as well." So Hodgie had a chat to my dad, and then next thing I knew, Dad was down at the club, and I was in the coach's room, or I think the welfare manager's room, just having a chat, and then everyone sort of got around me with my teammates and my family and stuff. So that phone call by Hodgie actually meant a lot to me. So that was a good, nice little moment.
That's incredible. It's something you don't hear about every day, and probably not the average person would have known that story. So I did want to bring that up just to get that understanding, because it's pretty impressive by Hodgie. And even for a young kid, I can imagine spurting those words out. Second ACL done. I'm not sure what the road ahead looks like. Must have been pretty hard.
I couldn't speak more highly of Hodgie. I think that was sort of the foundation of a pretty good friendship that we have now. We still touch base every now and then, but I suppose the mutual respect sort of really built and grew from moments like that. It was I suppose a nice little story to share for people that didn't know that.
Yeah, one of the other things I was, I guess, really interested on, and you mentioned this a couple of times before, and I've watched a little bit of, obviously, open mic was what I mentioned, but you talk about rehab, and I know, obviously, the mental health aspect of going through an injury is something really unique and challenging and a bit of a lonely and vulnerable period, but you speak about attacking your rehab as it's much of a mental battle as it is a physical battle. Can you give some understanding of what you mean by that?
Yeah, 100%, mate. Look, like I touched on before, I think as I got older, I started to understand my surroundings a little bit more, my position that I was in. So after the first two Ricos, you grow up. I was lucky enough to get some footy in between the third one, which was nice. So once that third Rico came about, I was a bit older. I understood that, okay, I'm going to be feeling pretty down about this. And I was more accepting of the position that I was in from a negative point of view. I got a lot of sympathy, which wasn't necessarily something that I wanted either. A lot of people saying sorry, whether they like it or not. There's not too many people that go through multiple ACLs. So there's a minute sort of community that can understand exactly how it feels. And I was just making sure that, third time round, fourth time round, fifth time round, rehab wise, that I was understanding that it was going to be a roller coaster, more so with the mental side of things and the emotions. I knew physically I could do rehab because I'd already done it twice. So there was no reason why I couldn't do it again, and, to the best of my ability as well, and get back out there and playing footy. That was never a what if or a doubt to me. It was more, okay, how do I find the passion, the want, the determination to, pick myself up each day, get myself out of bed and do rehab in a sense. Same four walls, same sort of exercises, same laps again for countless days until I'm in a position where I need to be fairly confident in kicking a footy and playing without any doubts. Look, it's pretty daunting, but again, I was accepting of the fact that some days are going to be pretty good, some days are going to be pretty bad. I think me embracing those bad days and the bad days were as simple as, look, I'm telling my rehab coach, who was Phil at Hawthorn, we're still really good mates now. The bad days were as simple as, look, I'm not feeling it today. Do you mind if I go home and spend time with my family?
They gave you that flexibility to kind of, that's
and
that balance.
I think it was really important because the club was really understanding, because they knew I wasn't necessarily the type of person to pull out of a rehab session. So if I wasn't feeling too well, if I wasn't really going to get much out of that rehab session anyway, quality-wise, if I was performing in a headspace that was pretty down and out and I didn't really want to be there. I think it was really important for me to have distractions outside of rehab. And even on the good days where I'd do my rehab sessions really well, I've really narrowed my focus. I was like, okay, I'm going to spend 2 hours at the footy club, get the most out of myself, push myself to the limit, as soon as I'm done, I'm going to uni, or I'm going back home for a little bit, because I don't need to spend 9 hours here.
Yeah.
Whilst the boys are getting ready to play a match on the weekend. And those days were good as well. Because I'd say in my first couple of years, I'd almost be first one there, last one to leave, even though I was in rehab. So again, bit draining.
Yeah, people don't really understand that when you're injured, it's not necessarily a breathing period. It's usually you're working harder than other players to get back out there, and even the physical battle, but it's also the mental battle that you take it off the field of, like, you're still carrying the pain, you're still sitting on the couch icing, you're doing all extra little things.
Little things, mate. And next minute you get there at 7, and you're getting home at 5, 6, and you're actually not playing on the weekend.
It's crazy.
And you've spent the whole day rehabbing an injury. Look, there's going to be moments where, like I said, you're going to have good days, and those days fly by. But then there's going to be days where it drags on, and you're alone in your headspace for a while, which is they're the hardest days, I reckon. But again, you just got to be willing to accept those down days. Pick yourself back up again, and see how the next day goes.
You had, I guess, a bit of a climax between ACL 2 and 3, and it was in year 3, right? So you've started to get some games together. You've got some consistent, I guess, fitness and confidence within your knees and body. And Clarko's called a team meeting and told everyone that Alex Woodward's going to be playing his first game against Sydney Swans at the MCG. Can you speak us through that moment after 2 ACLs and all the uncertainty and, I guess, the period you went through where you were alone and rehabbing, to have that moment? What was that like?
Yeah, mate, it was probably one of the best moments of my life, really. Look, that transition from second ACL into playing, I've got a green light now. That was a really fun period for me, because I just felt like I was 18 again. Playing almost like a new recruit, no real restrictions other than game time a little bit. But I was sort of told, just play footy, try and get your hands on the ball, and that's what I did for the majority of the season. I really made my focus simple on field, tried to contribute as much as I could to the team, show my strengths as a contested player in and under the packs. Thankfully, with the continuity came form as well. So I did have a few little slight hiccups with, a few minor injuries here and there, but compared to what I had gone through long-term injury-wise, to miss a week here or there didn't really mean too much for me. When I was on field, really enjoyed my footy. Again, thankfully, Box Hill were almost as successful as Hawthorn. So the Twos were a really strong side as well. So we were going deep into finals, having really strong form runs throughout the season, and had really good camaraderie and teamwork with one another. The game plans were seamless as well, so everyone was on the same page. But when it came to obviously hearing the news that my form was good enough to debut, my best mate was Max Bailey, who really took me under his wing rehab-wise for my first couple of seasons. So he retired the season before, but I took his number 39 at the start of that season. So for him to present me the jumper and say some kind words was really nice and meant a lot to me as well. So I think that moment was pretty surreal and something that I'll always remember. The actual debut in itself was a bit of a blur, but that's okay. You're in front of 70,000 to 80,000 fans against Sydney, who was a powerhouse team as well at the time. Fortunately, back then there was this substitution rule, so I didn't get on until the third quarter.
So you had the nervous weight of not just getting the debut, but then sitting on the bench waiting for the vest to come off.
Yeah, I hated that vest because I was just like itching on the interchange bench.
I hated that rule.
But yeah, thankfully it's not there anymore. But
yeah,
debute's a debut, and I was still able to at least get a touch. But the main thing was that the team got the win, and I was in the middle of the circle, and my family was there as well. My dad was really proud. My mum was really proud. My sister as well. So that holistically, and that's something that people don't understand, that with getting back onto the field. I know that I'm doing rehab solo, so to speak, but there's a whole team behind me really supporting me and wanting the best for me, and making sure that throughout rehab I'm not necessarily alone, or almost being a distraction themselves. So my family were huge. Phil, my rehab facilitator, was huge, and my friends as well. So even though I debuted solo as well, just me out on the field with my teammates, I had a lot of a pretty big support base that almost were waiting for that moment as well.
It kind of makes all the tough moments worth it, pushing through and persevering, when you get the elation of what you're there for, and everyone around you who's been impacted by the injuries and seen you, I guess, a bit down and out and not yourself all the time. They reap the rewards and benefits too. And that's probably what, I guess, the average person in and around sport don't really understand, is that your family and friends feel the pain, and they almost go through a bit of the injury sorrow too, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Spot on there, mate. Like, my family and friends probably saw me at my worst post-surgery. A lot of the unseen stuff where I'm, icing 12 to 16 hours a day, not getting a whole lot of sleep. I was actually, I have adverse reactions to painkillers, so I didn't really have any of that post-surgery. So in a lot of pain, and they were able to see that side of things, and also my down days, the days where I left the club early, wanted a distraction, that they were there for that as well. So even though people don't probably recognise them as much, I think it's pretty important that when I do get a chance to recognise them on a pretty open platform like this, or when I'm speaking publicly, they get the recognition they deserve as well. So, very thankful, very grateful that they were able to put up with me, even though it was, could have been a little bit annoying as well.
No, well, I'm glad you got to taste what it was like at the top, and you couldn't have probably played in a bigger game on the MCG in front of that many people. And I know then the week after you played again, and then given the strength of Hawthorn at the time, it was probably pretty hard to maintain a spot in that team. But then you went back to the twos in Box Hill, and then number 3 ACL happened. And I guess at that point of time when that happened, did you ever, I'm keen to understand whether the doubt started to come in of whether this is what you actually wanted to do and whether you wanted to go through that process again. Did that ever factor in?
So obviously that debut season, I was able to finish that season, which was quite nice. So it was probably the first time in a long time I felt like I was back. Didn't really have any worries, which was fantastic. Hawthorn won a grand final that year as well, so I felt like I was a part of those celebrations for once.
So you played that whole season then?
Yeah, I played that whole season.
So you played that whole season, right?
Yeah, so 2014 I actually got a whole season out, which is fantastic.
Oh, that's awesome. So you played the rest of the year in Box Hill?
Box Hill, yep. And Box Hill went to the finals. Couldn't quite win the grand final, unfortunately, but the AFL team were able to win the grand final that season. Come 2015, which was my 4th year in the system, it was a bit of a challenge for me to sort of cement a spot in that side or put my hand up as consistently as possible. So again, you just touched on, they're fairly stacked in the midfield. You've got multiple Australians and a Brownlow medalist in there. Good luck trying to break into that midfield. But I never thought of it that way. I thought it was a good challenge to really put pressure on the selection panels, put them in a position where they had no choice but to pick me. So I was emergency most weeks, but I had a pretty open and honest conversation with Clarko about the likelihood of me needing to be a dual position player. So I needed to play a little bit more forward, impact the game that way. And probably in that season, I was starting to really evolve as a player, which was, a nice feeling. I never thought I could be, a pretty dynamic forward. And that's the nature of the AFL industry now. You've got to be able to play multiple positions.
Right.
Likelihood of you being a pure defender, midfielder or forward, they're pretty rare spots to hold down. So as I started to develop as a forward, you touched on, I went down again for my 3rd ACL. Was it a moment where I had my first sort of self-doubt? Probably not. It was probably the first time I felt really angry about the whole situation. I thought those ACL injuries were past me. that third ACL, I just felt like, again, we sort of touched on it before, with wrong place, wrong person, wrong time, that certain spot on the field and that certain mechanism. You know what I mean? I didn't blame myself for the moment. I was just disappointed that it just happened. You know, it had to happen to me, who had a history of 2 other ACLs in his career. But again, I didn't want to have those moments too often where I'm poor me. You know, I didn't really.
It's hard not to do that sometimes, though. Yeah. And people don't. I've never done an ACL, touch wood, but I've experienced being around a lot of players that have done them, and the players that I've seen do them. For me, I would say it's almost a bit of a life-changing injury, because it really does change how you move, how you recover, your mental aspect, and then even coming back. I mean, I've seen players do ACLs one time and they've maybe lost a yard, or they've lost a bit of a, change of pace, or how they turn and shift. They've had to reshape themselves as a bit of a player. So for you to go through, I guess, leading into, was it season 4? And then the third one happened. Did you ever start to see, I guess, the way you were attacking footy and the way you thought you were going to play? Did that ever change, or were you still the same player through all the injuries?
No, I suppose, it probably doesn't look good on paper that I kept, reoccurring this ACL injury. So did that contribute to me constantly doing my ACL? No, because my mindset was very specific in rehab. I wanted to come back in a way that I never left, and that's sort of how I approached my rehab and how I attacked my game style right from the first game back. So I knew a standard that I wanted to play at. Look, I'm not the quickest player. I know my strengths, but also know the weaknesses that I want to get better at. Not for a second, and that's, again, my personality. Not for a second did I think, okay, I've got to evolve as a player and not be able to do this. I did create new habits. So, for example, even though I'm not a tall player, I'd probably be less inclined to try and, jump into a pack to try and take a mark. I knew that I'd probably be better suited on the ground and waiting for the crumbs. So that's probably an example of one thing, but I did build new habits in rehab. So it wasn't the fact that I needed to eliminate a certain attribute of my game. I just needed to evolve it. So my side steps, my agility and all that sort of stuff needed to make it really tight knit. Again, make it a good habit thing rather than having long levers. Yeah. I think that these are terms that we use in sporting aspects, but I knew that if I had wider stances when trying to change direction, I was pretty vulnerable, and my ACL would have been under a fair bit of stress. So, look, I took those sort of habits and made sure that I did them, 10, 20 times before getting back out there on the field. But yeah, I never had self-doubt. I think that's something I prided myself on as well. Yeah. I made sure that, when I did return, I was impactful and going to contribute to the team.
What were you like off the field when you had those injuries? How did you, in short, keep sane without sort of losing your mind? What were you keeping yourself busy? How were you as a person? Were you down and out, or were you always upbeat?
I think that's a really good question, because I'd like to say I've almost got a split personality, really. So on field, I'm really competitive, so a little bit of white line fever as well. I get a little bit angry. Off field, I'm quite mellow and keep to myself a bit. And
usually they're the scary ones, the ones that are quiet off the field.
Yeah.
You steer very clear of them.
Yeah. Well, when it came to on field, that footy was mine. So when I saw the ball, I made sure that no one else was going to sort of try and beat me to it. And that was a pretty good mindset to have as a contested on baller. But off field, I think what I really had the benefit of was a lot of time to create really good networks. And I made sure that I made some good relationships with some pretty important people at the footy club, and some members and some board members as well. The people that behind the scenes had a lot of impact on the footy club. I think that was really important to me. Again, sort of built my reputation as a person at the footy club as well. But networking was one thing that I really enjoyed doing, having a coffee with someone. And then, that opened doors into, potential business and employment opportunities.
Were
Obviously
you
studied.
already planning, not planning, but I guess were you already looking outside of football at that point, or were you always just, I need to get back and play footy?
I think as I got older, so as I exited the teenage years,
Yeah.
I got my head around having a contingency plan. So I became really aware of the fact that, AFL's not going to last forever. It's pretty rare for players to have 10 plus year careers. So I delved into uni, but understood that, look, I can be really committed to my football, but off field I can, commit another passion elsewhere as well. So uni was big, networking as I touched on, but also made sure that I had a lot of family and friends time as well. So did that keep me sane off field? Yeah, it did, because I didn't really think about footy, which was probably a main aspect. My first couple of years, I was probably too much involved in that headspace of thinking about footy too much. As I got older, more mature, I found a really good balance.
Yeah. So you did some study as well, didn't you? You always kind of were quite active in that, even from sounded like the early years of your footy career.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily something I enjoyed. But
Does anyone?
Yeah, I know. After year 12, I swear, I was like, thank God. And then next minute I'm in uni, so I'm back at school. I felt like it was a really good distraction. And I think I did have passions other than footy. So real estate was one. So I studied business management and real estate at uni, thinking that maybe I could be a real estate agent one day. Obviously, as we know now, I'm a mortgage broker. Didn't quite, once my career ended, I didn't think I quite had the personality to be a real estate agent. So I sort of use that study in a way that how can I still have a passion in that real estate market. So now I basically just work on behalf of the buyer, organise their home loan, and still be involved in the process.
That's crazy, mate. So just to get to where you are now, from the Hawthorn experience, where you obviously went through your third ACL, and I'll be honest, I don't know many people that would have kept going. I know there's been a couple in your position that have, but I think the average person may have thrown it in then and there. But you decided no, you wanted to keep tracking on, and you still thought you had more to offer and more to give to the game. So from that point, you ended up heading into the Collingwood VFL. Is that correct?
Yeah. So that third ACL, probably the difference with that one was I really didn't put a time limit on it. So I think that third ACL was 15 months, which is quite long.
Right.
But I really wanted to take my time. I had a lot more time off, so I went on a couple of holidays, which was really important, freshen me up. So I made sure that rehab third time around were in certain blocks and was mapped out in a certain way. Ticking or getting past a certain checkpoint would mean I'm going on a holiday, and then when I get back, I can attack my next phase of rehab. Then after that block, I can go away again for a couple of weeks and not have to be at the footy club. And then I knew that my final block of rehab was building up into playing games. So I was really mentally excited about the fact that I'm actually not that far away now. I think, which was really important.
Was that something Hawthorn implemented, or was that kind of you brought that up through experience? You're like, it helps my rehab process if I get away for a couple of weeks?
Yeah, I think it really helped with my second rehab, even though I only went away for a little bit with my second ACL. My third one, I was like, no, I need a couple of them, and I need them for 1 or 2 weeks, which was pretty important. Once I went away, I completely took footy out of the equation. Was just a normal person. Went to a different country. It was just a nice sort of environment to be in. That when I came back, I was fairly refreshed. So, getting back into footy post third Rico was interesting, because first game back, I tore the plantar fascia in my right foot. So,
okay, that's the bottom. That's the bottom of your foot, right?
Yeah. So that's pretty significant.
It's a weird spot to have a muscle tear.
So the theory is if you half tear it, it's worse. because you obviously you got the pain and all that. That's going to stay around, and you'll probably need injections and that sort of stuff to get up each week. So thankfully, with that plantar fascia, it tore straight through. So I didn't need surgery or anything. It was just 1 or 2 weeks on the sideline. But that was my first game back post third Rico, which was
Was there some hearts in mouth when that happened?
Yeah, even me, because I was like, oh no, that felt like a serious injury in my foot when it happened. Oh no, I felt something pop. And it's just all sorts.
You must have thought you were cursed at that point.
Oh yeah, I was like, oh god, he's another one. But that's all right. Once I heard 1 or 2 weeks, I knew that after that I could again come back into the team, Box Hill, of course, and make an impact. And that's what I did. I was fairly close to actually playing in the ones, I think, at one stage. But unfortunately, towards the latter end of that season, I just had a few little niggles, and they thought it was best just to not put that knee at risk. So come the end of that 5th season, I think there was an understanding, and this is probably the best way to explain it. Look, AFL's a business industry. I'm taking a spot on the list, and a year and a half of footy for a 5-year return, it isn't the best. I was on the list for 5 years. I gave them 1.5 years of playing, even though I was a good fella around the club and all that sort of stuff.
That's what they remember, don't they? They remember how you probably carried yourself off it. That's where your legacy stands.
Right. But I was probably taking up a spot on the list for a young fella where they could play every week. And I was pretty understanding. It was a really respectful exit meeting. Clarko and welfare manager Jason Burt, we were all left on hugs and stuff, and it was just really nice. And Clarko, I remember Clarko saying, just the way I went about rehab, I think if I went about it that way, just in general life, I'd create my own luck, and I've sort of held that mantra moving forward. So. As you touched on, after that, I went to Collingwood VFL for a new start.
Yeah, so then the exit talk happened with Hawthorn, and this actually is interesting how Clarko said that, because I couldn't echo that sentiment more. By the sound of how you attacked rehab and the person you maintained to be and probably developed to be, I think it's really tough. I think it's really tough to carry yourself that way when you've got a long injury every day. Like, to be consistent with that, there's no real trophy for that. There's no real award. There's just, the tap on the back here and there from the physio or the rehab people and maybe the senior leaders or the coach every now and then to keep you going. But people don't understand that's a real character building experience. And the fact that at that point you'd gone through your third and you'd had an exit meeting, and in your mindset you were still hungry to play footy and still get more out of yourself, I think's just awesome in general. So can you give us some perspective of how you went through from the exit meeting into Collingwood and why you thought you still had more to give following, I guess, 4 or 5 years of not playing?
Yeah, you're definitely spot on with, funnily enough, my time at Hawthorn was, fairly injury riddled. But if I had my time again, those are significant moments where, it shaped me into the person that I am today. So wouldn't necessarily say I'd change anything, really. I'm pretty proud of the person that I am. Look, I'm not perfect. I still make mistakes. And I think they're pretty important lessons learnt. But yeah, I'm pretty happy and proud of my overall career at Hawthorn. But yeah, going into the Collingwood VFL, you touched on me still being hungry. Yeah, I still felt like I had a place in the AFL system. So reached out to a few footy clubs in the off season, seeing if there was any interest. Well, there was a little bit of interest, which was nice, because reality was when I did play, it was good quality,
Right.
even in the twos, and they understood that Hawthorn was still a fairly stacked team and hard to break into. So
was that what kept you going, I guess, because you had a really good kind of season at Box Hill as well, that sort of year you kept playing?
Resounding sort of the feedback I got from a couple of clubs saying, look, if you can get through a season, we'd sort of consider you. We just need to see some continuity and be able to trust your body. And I was completely understanding of that, because I was on the front foot with approaching the footy clubs, giving them the phone call, sending them letters, a bit of an unorthodox way to put my name up, but it showed that I was pretty keen to continue an AFL career. Just wasn't meant to be through the drafts, and that's okay. Like I said, I got some feedback on, potentially extending my career if I was able to, perform with some continuity. And I felt like Collingwood was a really good home for me. I had some friends there, had some pretty good relationships there as well. And I decided that was pretty seamless. So my transition from footy into work as well, decided to take up a mortgage broking job at a firm in the city. So that was the logistics of it made a lot of sense to me. Obviously Collingwood train at the Holden Centre. After work, just go to training and then go home after that. At the time, I was living in Hawthorn, so all within sort of a similar precinct.
Right. So you became that's a kind of a semi-pro in that sense. I mean, you're working, you've got the working full time into the footy after hours.
Yeah, and that was a really different side of it. So that's probably something I didn't appreciate before with the the VFL players at Box Hill when I was playing with them on the weekend.
Right.
They slog out 6 to 4 o'clock trading hours or whatever working hours they do, whether they're working in an office or working in trade. And then going to footy training, it's just like, wow, these are huge days.
Then they've got the coach to give them the nerve to say, put your head over the footy.
Yeah, I know. You can't blame them with
since
some 7. Amazing. So you couldn't blame them with some of those training sessions if they were a little tired, especially in pre-season on the 40-degree days.
Yeah.
They've just been working all day. It's just like, oh, God. But it gave me a different perspective in footy. I know that I learned to appreciate it a little bit more because it was an outlet from work. Whereas before I saw, footy as my job and sometimes a bit of a grind as well, especially being in rehab for so long. This time I felt like footy was my outlet, so it was completely different. I started to really enjoy it again, sort of brought me back to the days of being a youngster where, after school you go to footy training.
Right.
And they were really enjoyable.
That's so. How long were you at Collingwood for? And I guess was it a similar situation in how you did ACL 4 and 5 to the previous ones? Were they?
Yeah, it was. Unfortunately, it was. Yeah, my injuries followed me to Collingwood, which was not ideal. But I felt like I made a fairly good impression at the footy club. I came there knowing that I wanted to play at a certain standard, but also that I wanted to have a fresh environment and start again. Hopefully with no injuries, but that wasn't the case. My first season at Collingwood, I went down, I think, in the 3rd game or something.
Right.
The first quarter, I knew straight away that my knee just gave way a little bit, and it was just a little bit uncomfortable. Sort of similar to my first knee, where I didn't find out till Monday. So got the scans and I broke down after that because that one hurt me because that sort of confirmed the fact that AFL's probably not going to be likely anymore. And that was probably the first time where not necessarily self-doubt, it was more, okay, I'm not interested in playing this sport anymore. It's bringing a lot of hardship into my life, a lot of emotional and mental stress taking a huge toll on me. At the time, I was 25, I think. I shouldn't be going through this at 25. So, and then I had the added layers of how am I going to go to work if I'm, in a knee brace or on crutches and that sort of stuff. So it's a different perspective once you're out of the AFL system. You don't quite get the resources that you're used to. So, I parked. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, what was your headspace like?
I sort of just parked my career for a bit. I was sort of at the time I was like, no, I'm done. But I was more done with the injury. I was just like, I'm very much over it. Didn't necessarily want to put a timeline or an expectation on obviously I needed to rehab this thing again. I was understanding that I definitely want to get a reconstruction again because I'm too young not to have an ACL in there. So I decided to get another reco, which meant another 12 months if I wanted to play again. But I didn't necessarily put that as a priority. I just wanted to make sure that I got my knee right. Still use the facilities at the Collingwood Footy Club. They were really good to me, allowing me to use that and get physio when I could. But a lot of it had to be independent. So a lot of the rehab and a lot of that stuff, even though I had a rough sort of idea of what I needed to do, and I still touched base with some of the rehab facilitators at Collingwood, Ben and Sam. A lot of it was, there was a lot more unseen stuff. So obviously I was going to work 9 to 5. Wasn't necessarily going to training every night. So I had to make sure that I was doing the rehab, obviously, in my own time, because VFL's, it's usually a Monday, Wednesday, Friday type setup, whereas AFL's, every day of the week. So I can get those resources. Completely different landscape, but I sort of found a way to get through the initial part. The initial 6 months were pretty tough, more so mentally, because I didn't really feel like I was satisfied with ending my career in that sort of way. But I was really happy that I transitioned into a job that wasn't going to leave me necessarily completely financially stressed, if you know what I mean. I still had another avenue to make some bread and put some food on the table. It just came to be that after a few months, Collingwood AFL team, after the season, tapped me on the shoulder and asked me if I wanted to be their runner. So I felt like that was probably,
That's a unique kind of outcome, considering, I mean, you've had a weird journey in the sense of a lot of heartbreak and wanting to play games, and then you're probably the one way you thought you'd end up on the field the most.
And that's exactly how I saw it. Part of it was, all this running would be really good for my rehab, so that's good. Get some conditioning in the legs. The other part of it was, once upon a time, I felt like being on an AFL ground was so foreign or so far away. Sorry. Next minute, I'm running out there every weekend amongst 44 other players that are on AFL lists. So I'm out there. Wasn't necessarily how I dreamt of it, but I was definitely out there, and it was such a unique experience, something that I really loved and something that I really embraced. And subconsciously, just being out there built my passion again to wanting to return to play football. Never thought I wanted to play footy again after Rico 4. Next minute, being out there every weekend on an AFL landscape, I wanted to play again.
I was going to say, is that what refreshed you and reinvigorated you? Because I mean, I know people who have packed it in after ACL 1 or 2, and for you to come back after 4 and go, well, still, that's not going to faze me, I'm going to go back again. I was keen to understand what the hell made you kind of want to do that, and was it running for Collingwood through that sort of period gave you that lifeline?
100%. So just touching base back on the initial rehab for the 4th Rico. So that first 6 months, pretty good insight was I again planned a trip away. This time, obviously, outside the AFL system, this was just going to be a holiday for me. But I had a certain thing on my bucket list that I wanted to tick off, and that was snowboarding. So I booked a trip to Canada, and I had mates that were living over there, working over there at the time. So when I first did my 4th ACL, I caught up with my mates at a pub and said, "Look, I'm gonna meet you over there in 6 months." Because they were moving over there in a couple of weeks. But I'd said, I'll meet you over there in 6 months. I want you guys to teach me how to snowboard. It's on my bucket list. That's what I want to do.
That's amazing.
I was being real stubborn about it. But my whole rehab for that 6 months was based around, okay, how can I snowboard? So that was refreshing in a way, wasn't it? So
what a unique way to do it.
Yeah, I wasn't rehabbing to play footy again. I was doing all these balancing things and doing all these circuits and different rehab routines and techniques and everything with Ben, who's a good friend of mine now, the Collingwood VFL rehab facilitator, and just all around snowboarding, which was fantastic because when I felt so refreshed that it was just a different avenue or perspective on rehab. So I wasn't thinking about footy. I had this huge carrot of being in Canada for a month, with the idea of snowboarding with my mates. I think that was pretty exciting to me. And then when I got back, we had that running opportunity come up. So that was again a different and pretty fresh view on doing rehab and building my passion for footy again. But that was definitely the main aspect of me wanting to play football, was just being out there and missing the game, so to speak.
Yeah, it's like it's reverse engineered the typical ACL rehab by jumping on a snowboard and going through the Alps. I don't know if people recommend
when
that.
I went over there, actually, I learned how to snowboard. It was not an issue. I wasn't even thinking about my knee or anything.
That's
I was
that's at that point in your life, that's the kind of rehab you need. You're not going to go on the gym 5 nights a week. Yeah, I'll do my rehab in the snow in Canada. That's how I'm going to get through this.
Yeah, and I think in a way it really helped my mental as well. Like, I just felt like if I didn't go to Canada or had that carrot, and I was really thankful for my friends Justin and Elkie being over there and willing to have me for and teach me how to snowboard and everything. But yeah, if I didn't have that carrot, like, I would have done 6 months of slogging out a 9 to 5 and then trying to find another way to do rehab. So I probably would have been in a really poor headspace for a while. So look, it was pretty unorthodox, pretty different, and I didn't really plan on it. It was pretty spontaneous as well, but something that I think I reflect on now and really thankful for that I did.
Yeah, man, what a beautiful experience that would have been. So then you've kind of had this running experience at Collingwood, a bit of a unique way to introduce yourself back into the AFL scene, and then you've gone again for wanted to have another crack with the VFL system and get yourself ready again. So
thankfully, when I returned back on the field, I was touching on before. Well, when I returned to playing footy, my mindset's very set on, okay, I've got a standard that I want to play at, and I want to impact right from the start. So when I returned to playing, I really didn't feel like I missed a beat, which is not being overconfident or arrogant or anything. I just felt like, look, I'm ready to go, and this is how I play. So thankfully, I impacted most games and contributed to the team, and felt really valuable to some of the outcomes to some of the games, which was really nice, because I hadn't played footy in a while, and getting some team wins and being amongst the boys. I hadn't played a lot of games with a lot of those fellas. I just created friendships really off field. But it was good for them to experience me as a footy player as well, because that was the whole reason why I came to the footy club.
Right.
And then became a runner again throughout the Collingwood final series. Obviously had that moment in the grand final, which was another challenge, another hurdle, which something I never planned on, and it was a bit of a sour note to.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. It's absolute bullshit that anyone even puts a spotlight on you in that situation. How is the bloke going to get near the footy? I saw, and for context, I'll speak about this, because there's a moment in the grand final between Collingwood and West Coast, a pretty critical point in the game, where I think a Collingwood player in the back 50 was, I wouldn't say shanked it, but he wasn't going to kick it there, is my opinion. It seemed like he was looking elsewhere, and it's come off the side of his boot, and then you've kind of not made contact, but you've been in the line of one of the Collingwood players who was running where the ball was going to be marked or intercepted by a West Coast player.
It's just a surreal series of events, really. So as a runner, I've got a job to do out there and deliver messages. Me personally, at the time, I really didn't think I was in any position to receive the football, you know what I mean? Or be in a position where the football was going to come my way. Next minute, I see this football, literally, I look up and I see this football coming at me, which was, a nightmare, really.
Jesus, so thinking, what's this?
Yeah, as runners, we're sort of told just to run in a direction if you're ever in the way of things. So that's what I did. I just sort of picked a direction. Unfortunately, I crossed paths with Jaden Stevenson, and I don't really think it would have impacted the mark. But look, it's one of the great unknowns. But
Yeah,
the fallout after the game was something that I'd never experienced before. So look, a lot of blame on myself, and that was, me just being me.
in the moment, right? Just
Yeah, exactly
being
right. I
critical.
think
Yeah.
that's a pretty normal reaction. I was really thankful for Bucks and the Collingwood Footy Club for obviously putting their arms around me and giving me a lot of support, along with a lot of their supporters as well. But yeah, the tirade and I'm really glad that there's a notion now, especially this season, and last season as well, to call out that behaviour where online bullying and that sort of stuff.
Did that follow after that? Was there a period of that kind of abuse?
It was just really it was a lot to deal with the the death threats and suggestions of suicide and all that sort of stuff. So it's again nothing that I'd dealt with before, and probably something that was pretty foreign at the time as well. So like I said, there's a really good notion now to call that behaviour out and try and stamp that out of the game. At the time, I felt a little bit alone with having to deal with that, which was really tough. So that was probably the hardest part, probably mentally throughout my footy career. I'd never dealt with so much negativity and just my own thoughts as well were pretty sour. I was in a really bad headspace for a long time after that. But I found a way, which was good, and being a lot more open about the situation now as well. Open mic was a really good opportunity for people to get an insight into what that was like for me.
Yeah,
because
did you seek help around that period? Were you talking to people? Did you get off?
Yeah, I was pretty kept a close knit group of friends, I suppose, but mainly my family. But for a couple of weeks, I was closed up inside, mate. I didn't really want to see anyone. But again, is it a normal reaction? Not necessarily, but found a way to deal with it, and I think it's again one of those moments that sort of helped me shaped into the person that I am today. So we all face adversity, mate, and that was just a curveball from destiny that I couldn't really see coming. But I think everything happens for a reason. So I learned to deal with it, accept the moment for what it was. I never pushed it aside or ignored it. I just learnt to accept it for what it was. I think as people in everyday life, we either learn to survive or surrender, and that's like a little saying that I live by as well. I just learnt to survive with that moment, make adjustments, and move forward.
That's one thing you've mentioned, and I picked that up on open mic. You said it quite a bit, accepting the moment for what it was, which is, I think, a really hard view to stick by. For me, just to give context with my soccer career, I struggled to accept the situation of not playing, like at the top when I was a young kid and thought I should be. Whereas I think you've got a really calming perspective on really challenging periods that the average person would really struggle with, to have that perspective of, well, it is what it is and life will go on, and kind of look at it as in a glass half full perspective. It's pretty unique, mate.
Yeah, it's a little bit of my personality as well. I touched on before, I'm not perfect either. So I have had moments where, I've disappointed other people and let other people down. But again, they're probably moments that I've accepted and learned to deal with as well. It's a pretty broad term to accept the moment for what it was. The way that I see it is, it's just another challenge or chapter of adversity in your life. I think if we were to think of our lives being fairly smooth sailing, then we're being naive, aren't we? So
Right.
It's just another challenge that's provided to you. If you can learn to deal with it and face it front on, I think you're going to be a better person having gone through it. So that's something that I was really accepting of from an early age as well. But again, I do have moments where I get challenged and it does take a little bit longer. Like that grand final, it does take a little bit longer to get over.
Well,
But
that's real stuff. I mean, death threats and provoking suicide. I mean, that's going to challenge anyone. That's not.
Yeah, it's just something I wasn't expecting. That's all. And a lot of these adversities and challenges are, they come from a blind spot. So,
Right.
If you saw it coming, you'd probably prepare for it. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, with adversity, injuries, challenges in life, they're pretty unexpected. So, I think it speaks volumes to the character, the way you sort of rebound and respond to it.
Mate, definitely. So I want to get into this last rebound, I guess, that you went in, and the experience of, okay, I've gone through this again. This is ACL number 5, and this is it. Can you lead us up to that moment? And it's probably harder for me to talk about than it is for you, because I feel like you've accepted it and you've been through it. But what was that whole experience like again?
Yeah, so ACL number 5, that was just a strange, eerie moment, really. So just by chance, it happened to be against Box Hill at Box Hill Oval last round of the VFL season. Pretty unique circumstances. 2 footy clubs that I've played for over my AFL VFL career. Last quarter, again, probably a scenario that had no fault on mine. I didn't really do anything wrong. And it was very much a footy moment where I just got hit in a certain way. Unfortunately, my knee crumbled underneath me. But that was probably the only ACL where I was like, first thought was, I don't want to play ever again. And and that was probably a way of dealing with it as well. It was finally a little bit of a weight off my shoulders. It's just like, okay, this rehab, I actually don't need to think about playing footy ever again. I can actually commit to the next chapter in my life, no holds barred, with no real thought of footy. And it was, footy had been such a huge part of my life since a kid through to a teenager, as an adult, from fun to business as a job. To finally let that go, it was a breath of fresh air in a sense, but obviously it took a little while to get over. But I was really comfortable with the decision of hanging up the boots, so to speak, and moving on with life. And I don't have any regrets about not wanting to play footy anymore. I still feel really satisfied about not wanting to play. I don't even have that desire anymore. I can finally go back into a position where I can be a fan. Go to obviously not now in 2020, but hopefully in the future, go to an oval, have a beer with my mates, and cheer on a footy team.
Yeah, start abusing the players, giving. No, but I actually think, I guess just the period of that acceptance, and you kind of get to this point where you maybe got it on ACL 5 in that moment, because you've probably been through quite a bit where you were like, well, the AFL journey's over, the footy dream's slipping away, but it's quite liberating when you can look back on these really difficult moments after accepting them and knowing that actually I might not change that now, because I might not be as well-rounded as I am right now. And I reckon you're in that place, aren't you, where you're just looking back, and you probably wouldn't, I'd take 50, 100 AFL games if I could. But at the same time, would you be the same Alex Woodward you are now? Maybe not. Yeah,
exactly right. So, those moments shaped me into the person that I am today. I wouldn't take them back necessarily. That sounds really stupid. Would you take back your 5 ACLs? I don't see them as 5 ACLs. I just see them as 5 moments in my life where I was dealt a bit of adversity. Would I take them back? No. Would I change anything? Not necessarily. I just feel like it's definitely shaped me into the person that I am today, and I look forward to moving on. That 5th ACL, I took the risk of starting a business, so I was already transitioning into a different chapter of my life without really consciously committing to it 100%. Whereas now I can really delve into that and put a lot of effort and time into that, and being the best mortgage broker that I can be. And still take moments and experiences and lessons learnt from my AFL and VFL experiences, try and translate as much as I can, circumstance-wise and experience-wise, and make little links where I can, take the lessons that I learned from those sort of moments and bring it to the forefront as a mortgage broker. I think that's something that I'm working on, and something that I really pride myself on as a mortgage broker, being really empathetic and understanding, having gone through so many challenging times.
Yeah, because it's funny. I think the innate qualities that come with a sporting athlete is then your next ventures in business or anything, you still got that competitive edge and that belief. You still kind of want to be the best you can be. And I think that's what people overlook. So I'm excited to see how you go on that journey. And I think one of the things I was wanting to mention for all the listeners and all the budding footy players and sporting people out there, no matter where you are in your career, Alex has a blog up on his website, which I think is at fortitude.com.
Yeah, so it's morefortitude.com. Fortitude's a bit of a play on words with the number 4 in it.
So there's some blocks in there that you pretty much talk about this, what we've done in this podcast, but you've written kind of a journal on all those experiences. And they're pretty enlightening and pretty powerful. And there's actually this one bit of a passage here that I wanted to read, because it's pretty, I think the way you write was pretty impressive. And you mentioned here, having worked hard towards a lifelong dream, I was quick to realize that it is very rare for things to fall into place exactly how you picture them. My journey so far has been one of repetitive pain and anguish, but ultimately I hope it is one that depicts perseverance and positivity for those that have been or are currently going through situations that are similar to mine. In times of hardship, there can always be some sort of silver lining found. This is my story. It's yeah, mate, it's pretty impressive story, Alex Woodward, and we're really happy that we could have you on, mate. I think it was an awesome conversation that probably was very educational for a lot of people out there to understand your side of what those challenges are, but that it's not doom and gloom when the tough times come. So, mate, we really appreciate you having you on, and something we would love to have back on for sure, and hear how you're going in your new venture.
Amazing, mate. Thanks for having me. Absolute pleasure. Really grateful and really appreciative that you wanted me on your podcast, and I really enjoyed it. Thanks, mate.
Awesome.